We spoke last time about men.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of discussion around just this wild difference between how men are feeling in the world and how they're being understood in the world versus women. Before we started recording, you said your thoughts have developed even further since we last spoke on that.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things to understand. So the first is that if you're a man who's struggling in the world today, we as men assume that if we're struggling, we need to fix something on the outside, right? So if I am not making enough money, the answer to that is to get some additional certification or become more productive, maybe use some kind of supplement. So that men are fundamentally different because we are conditioned, and this could be somewhat biological, but it's certainly societal, to solve our problems externally. But the one overwhelming thing that I've learned about men is that, if you're a man who wants to get better, 90% of what you need to do is not outside of you, it's actually inside of you. But this is not where men look, right? We think like, okay, I need to get this kind of car, I need to get sexier, I need to be able to bench twice as much. So we always look to things outside of ourselves. But in the majority of the work that I've done with men, really the work that they need to do is internal, but we're not taught how to do that. There's a really great example of this. So if you look at the top 1% of earners versus the top 10%. So the top 10% of earners on the planet have a higher IQ than the top 1%. The people who actually make the most money have a lower IQ than the quartile right underneath them. And the big difference there is that people in the top 1% have a very high EQ. So we grossly underestimate the capacity to control oneself. And if you really want to achieve the most in life, that's what you really need to focus on. And the more that I work with men, this is basically what I teach them, and the outcomes that I see are amazing, right? We're talking like on the worst end. I worked with a 32-year-old guy who started using drugs when he was 13 years old, polysubstance use, mostly opiates and heroin. So at the age of 32, no job, not living on the street, crashing with his girlfriend. And then within a span of 4 years, this guy became a therapist himself, had a stable income, got married, and published his first dystopian fiction novel. So we're talking about a 4-year span of like being literally a heroin addict to being a published author and like having a stable, fulfilling relationship and job. And all of that work is like internal. It's about understanding the way that you work, understanding the way that your brain works, and learning how to control yourself.
So the crux of the issue is not being able to control oneself, essentially.
Control is even a step too far. The crux of the issue is not understanding yourself, right? Good diagnosis precedes good treatment. Control comes later.
Okay. So first you need to understand oneself.
Absolutely.
And how do I go about understanding oneself? And in the case of the gentleman you mentioned as the case study there, how did he go about understanding himself as a heroin addict who had polysubstance abuse to this successful person?
So I think the best place to start, I know it's going to sound kind of simple, but is to look at yourself. So what a lot of us do is anytime we have a problem, the first thing that we do is we try to jump to a solution. So if I'm unhappy in life, I need to make more money. If I'm struggling with dating, I need to get a better job or be sexier or whatever. So we tend to jump to solutions. So I think the first thing that you've got to do is slow a little bit down and look at yourself. And when you look at yourself, there are a couple of things that I think a lot of people really miss. The first is what drives a lot of their behaviors. So we focus so much on fixing a behavior, like using heroin, for example, right? But we don't really ask ourselves, why am I using heroin in the first place? Where does the drive for using heroin come from? And that is the key question, right? So it's not about how you need to change. It's about why am I the way that I am? And this is where people make such a simple mistake. I'd say the majority of people that I talk to, when they look at themselves, they're not critically thinking. What they actually do is they'll make some kind of conclusion. I'm lazy. So like, think about what that means. Like laziness, first of all, is like not a thing. There is not like a laziness circuit in the brain. You can't measure laziness. Laziness is a lazy way of looking at laziness. If we look at human behavior, motivation, discipline, things like follow through, willpower, these are all discrete functions within our brain. And then we just say, oh, we're lazy. But which one of those things is lacking? So as we understand, okay, why are we lazy? What does that really mean? Where is my motivation coming from? What is the status of my willpower? As we explore these kinds of things, that's when we see really what the answer is. And the really cool thing is if you look at a lot of research on things like, we use this technique called motivational interviewing, where in order to change behavior, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. You need to help people understand things. And once a human being understands something themselves, they will automatically change behavior, right? If I tell you, hey, Steven, don't touch that pan, it's hot, and you touch the pan and you burn yourself, you won't listen to me. But the moment that you touch it and you get burned, suddenly your behavior will change on its own. We learn through experience. But if you look at the way that most people try to solve their problems, it's not through experience, it's through information. Oh, I have a problem, let me buy a book. I have a problem, let me listen to a podcast. Let me watch a YouTube video. And this is what we see, right? There are literally millions, if not tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people out there who are gaining a lot of information about change, but aren't actually changing. It's wild.
Why is that? There's quite a complex psychological thing, because there's a certain type of person who is like a self-development junkie, but they never self-develop.
Yeah.
They go to all the conferences, they watch all the videos, they've got, they know all the words, but they don't actually put anything into action.
Yeah, so there's a lot of subtlety, but the craziest thing is that, see, anytime we engage in some kind of self-help kind of thing, it actually is a coping mechanism to deal with some negativity within us. So let's say that I feel like I'm lazy. So then my mind looks at me and says, okay, I'm lazy, I need to do something about it. And then it's really tricky, right? Because your brain sees two options. One is that I can do something hard, or the other is I can do something easy. And we have to understand this. The brain has evolved to be lazy. The brain has evolved, laziness is efficiency. We want to get the most yield out of the smallest investment. So then what happens is our brain is like, okay, I could like go to the gym, or I could watch a video about working out. And if I watch a video about working out, I will be more efficient when I go to the gym. There are all kinds of scams that we run in our mind to actually activate parts of our brain that make us feel like we're making progress without actually making progress. That's how you become a self-development junkie or self-help junkie.